Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Thursday, Yom Hamishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Thursday? Steven in New Hampshire, John in Maine, Sharon in New Jersey, Guy in Ohio, Bella in Texas, Karen in Northern California, Paul in the Great Northwest, Bella in Florida, Tom in PA, Bill in St. Louis, Missouri. Is that different than mid-Missouri? And Jonathan in Ventura, California, Marjorie in Georgia, Aoife in Florida, Chaim in Florida, Alan in New York City. Welcome, everybody. Our class tonight is sponsored by our very own Sue Strauss in the house. Beautiful dedication to heal all those in need. Amen. Thank you, Susan, so much for sponsoring tonight's episode of AT Daily. May you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. We say amen, and thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. Our daf tonight is page 143 here in Tractate Bava Basra, the 23rd volume of the Talmud, continuing our journey through chapter 9. Tonight, continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 2, and we're going to complete, God willing, our discussion of Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 9. Reminder, I'm going to be in New York City Monday night for the New York City premiere of our movie Guns in Moses. And what that means is I'm going to be traveling Sunday through Tuesday. So no AT Daily on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. Apologize about that, but not going to be possible while I am traveling. People in the New York City area would love to see you there. Nina, please put the ticket information in the comments on Facebook and YouTube. Beautiful charity benefit for an organization called Join Israel that helps at-risk youth, families, and seniors in need in the land of Israel. Always an important cause, and all the more so since October 7th. Okay, we picked this up near the bottom of page 142b. Rabbi Yitzchak says that Rabbi Yochanan says, with regard to one who transfers ownership of an item to a fetus, the fetus does not acquire the item. Now, this seemingly contradicts our Mishnah that we've been discussing, where a man says, if my wife will give birth, who is pregnant, will give birth to a male child, the child, the baby, and she gives birth to a male baby, then he says, if my wife will give birth to a male baby, the baby will acquire 100 dinars. And she gives birth to a male baby, the baby acquires the 100 dinars. So seems like he made a promise to a fetus, and the baby gets the money once it's born. Therefore, it was seemingly the fetus acquired this money that the father pledged as a gift. But the baby, since it gets it once it's born, that means it acquired the right to get it when the man made the promise, before it was born. So that seemed to be proof that a fetus does acquire a gift that is given to it, even though obviously the fetus cannot do anything as a formal act of acquisition. And yes, you were talking about, Rav Hun and Rav Nachman, who were disagreeing. Can an unborn baby, can a fetus acquire property by inheritance? It seemed yes. By gift, the views are still split. We're not sure. Right, so here Rabbi Yitzhak is saying in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that with regard to one who transfers ownership of an item to a fetus, the fetus does not acquire the item. And if you say that the statement of our Mishnah, Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 9, which was on 140b, that with regard to one who gives a gift to his unborn child, and he gets it, this indicates that an item can be transferred to a fetus. Well, you might think that, but the circumstances there are unique. Since the disposition of a person is to be inclined toward his son, the sages validated such a transfer. But one cannot transfer an item to the unborn child of another. So a man can pledge a gift to his wife's unborn fetus, and the fetus acquires it, but he can't pledge a gift to somebody else's unborn fetus that's not his son. Then the fetus does not acquire the gift, is what's being said there. Shmuel said to Rav Chana of Baghdad, "Go out and bring me an assembly of 10 men, and I will say a halacha, I will say a law, to you in their presence so that it will be well publicized." And what was that law? The law was, with regard to one who transfers ownership of an item to a fetus, the fetus acquires the item. And the Gemara concludes, and the halacha is that with regard to one who transfers ownership of an item to a fetus, the fetus does not acquire the item. Is that the final ruling? This is why we don't paskin halacha from the Gemara. It's very hard to tell at the end of this discussion where there's kind of emphatic rulings given in both directions that a fetus does acquire a gift when it's given to it and a fetus does not. Where did the law end up? Okay, well, let's see where the law ended up according to Shulchan Aruch and Rambam. So here's the note. This is what's so nice about the Koren Talmud, that when there's these long discussions about halacha, it tells you where the halacha ended up. So here's the halachic note. One cannot transfer ownership of property to one who has not yet come into the world. Therefore, if one transfers an item to another person's unborn child, the fetus does not acquire the item, even if the giver says that the transfer of the item should take effect when the child is born. By contrast, if one transfers an item to his own unborn child, the fetus does acquire the item, even if the giver does not state that the transfer of the item should take effect when the child is born. And this ruling is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Chai Gaon rules that only a person on his deathbed can transfer ownership of property to his unborn child, but the law is not in accordance with this opinion. One can transfer ownership of property to his unborn child only if it is at least 40 days into gestation. Right? So before 40 days, it's not considered to be a fetus. After 40 days, it is considered to be a fetus. And if its father, or presumably mother, transfers a gift to the fetus receives it, has acquired it. But to a person who's not your family member, if you want to give a gift to a fetus, the fetus does not acquire it. That's where the law ends up. Now, the Gemara relates an incident. There was a certain man who said to his wife before she conceived, "My property is given to the sons that I will have from you." So we've said you can gift property to a fetus, an unborn child in your wife's belly, and the fetus does acquire it because it's your son. Can you give a gift to a idea of a fetus that does not exist yet? But saying, I will give this gift to the sons that are born from this wife, maybe the second wife, when she conceives. That's much more remote, right, in terms of a person who's not yet in the world. So he says, my property is given to the sons that I will have from you. This was an actual incident. A man said this. His older son from a previous marriage came and said to him, that man, right, this speaking about himself in the third person, which we so often see in the Gemara. So he was talking about himself, saying, what will become of me? right? The word he worded it was, that man, what will become of him? But he meant, what will become of me, your son from your earlier marriage? Will I receive nothing now that you have pledged to give all your property to the sons of this second wife when she should conceive them in the future? And the man said to his son, go, acquire a portion like one of the sons who will be born, i.e., you will receive a share as well. Okay, so the older son, or his only son, let's say from the previous marriage, who's now heard his father say, I'm going to give all my property to the sons of this second wife when she has them. She's not even pregnant. And the man, and he says, what will become of me? And the father says, go, you acquire a portion in my property just like the sons that I will have by my second wife. So the Gemara comments, those sons who were not yet born and not even conceived certainly did not acquire the property and do not receive more than their share as heirs when they will be born, as they are not yet in existence. When they're born, they can acquire as his heirs, like any sons of a father can, have an automatic portion in the absence of a will. But the fact that he said, I'm going to give all my property to them, does not change whatever portion they will have, because his promise, his gift to sons that were not even yet conceived is meaningless. So they don't get anything extra by virtue of this statement. Now the Gemara asks, with regard to this son, right, the son from the first marriage, does that young man receive an additional share of the inheritance in a case where there are other sons from the second wife, since his father gave him an additional share? In other words, the father didn't take away from him whatever he would have been entitled to anyway as a son. He says, go and acquire a share alongside of them. So in other words, maybe he gets a double portion alongside his other brothers. And now that his father said, go acquire a share alongside them, it's like actually now he has a triple portion because he said, go acquire alongside those sons. Did he acquire an extra portion? The problem is the father said, go acquire your portion alongside those future sons. But the future sons didn't acquire anything because his gift to, potential sons that haven't even been conceived yet was a meaningless gift. So now that he said to his existing son, acquire alongside those possible sons, where they didn't acquire anything, did his existing son acquire something extra? Or because his statement was meaningless with respect to the potential sons, perhaps his statement with respect to his existing son was also meaningless. And so it's as if he has said nothing at all. What is the outcome? Let's see. So with regard to this son, does the young man receive an additional share of the inheritance as in a case where there are other sons from the second wife, since his father gave him an additional share? Or does the young man not receive an additional share of the inheritance where there are other sons? So there are Rabbi Avin and Rabbi Meyasha and Rabbi Yirmiyah, who all say the young man does receive an additional share of the inheritance where there are other sons. The father said, you'll acquire another share alongside those sons. So if there are other sons in the future, then this son will acquire an additional share among them. And then on the other side of this argument, there is Rabbi Abahu and Rabbi Chanina Bar Papi and Rabbi Yitzchak Nepacha, who all say the young man does not receive an additional share of the inheritance where there are other sons. Even if other sons are born in the future, still this man, this son from the earlier marriage, receives nothing extra. Rabbi Abahu said to Rabbi Yirmiyah, is the halacha in accordance with our opinion, or is the halacha in accordance with your opinion? Rabbi Yirmiyah said to Rabbi Abahu, it is obvious that the halacha is in accordance with our opinion, as we are older than you. And the halacha is not in accordance with your opinion, as you are youngsters. Rabbi Abahu said to Rabbi Yirmiyah in reply, does the matter depend upon age? The matter depends upon the reason behind the ruling. Rabbi Yirmiyah asked him, and what is your reason? Rabbi Abahu replied, go to Rabbi Avin as I explained this halacha to him. And he nodded his head in the study hall in approval of this explanation. Now on page 143a. Rabbi Yirmiyah went to Rabbi Avin who said to him, Rabbi Abahu's reasoning is that if a father said to his son, acquire an item as a donkey does? Does the son acquire it? Right? If you say to your son, acquire this car if you say to your son, acquire my car, you've gifted him your car. You just gave him the car. He received your car. It's now his car, not your car. But if you say to your son, acquire my car as a donkey does, can a donkey acquire a car? No, a donkey cannot acquire a car. So when you said to your son, acquire my car as a donkey acquires a car, what you said to him is nothing. You said nothing at all. That's what he's saying here. In the same manner that the son would not acquire anything if his acquisition were likened to that of a donkey, which possesses no ability to acquire an item, so too, since the father compared the son's acquisition to the acquisition effected by his unborn and unconceived children, who possess no ability to acquire property, the son did not acquire any extra property. And this is as it was stated with regard to one who says to another, acquire an item as a donkey does. He does not acquire any property as a donkey cannot acquire property. But with regard to one who says, you and a donkey shall both acquire my property. Now we have a disagreement. If you say, you shall acquire property, or you shall acquire of my property as a donkey does, so you've acquired nothing because a donkey cannot acquire property. But if I say to you, you and my donkey shall acquire my property, then what? On the one hand, I'm linking you with a donkey, and a donkey cannot acquire property. Therefore, maybe the entire statement is meaningless and you have acquired nothing. Or perhaps the donkey cannot acquire anything, but you can. I didn't say that you're acquiring like a donkey acquires. I said you're acquiring alongside the donkey. If the donkey cannot acquire anything, well, then maybe you acquire all of it. Or at the very least, you acquire half of it. So which is it? Is my statement meaningless and you acquire nothing? Is it that you acquire your half and the donkey's half, which is meaningless, remains with me? Or is it that since the donkey can't acquire anything, you acquire all of it? Three possibilities. Let's see. There is disagreement. Rav Nachman says the person acquires his half of the property. The donkey gets nothing. I keep that half. The half that I said to you, you get. And in fact, that's what Rav Nachman says, and that is the halacha, that is the law. But let's see what the other opinions are. The person acquires his half of the property. Rav Hamnuna says it is as though the giver does not say anything. Since the beneficiary was included with the donkey in the same acquisition, he does not acquire any property, just as the donkey does not acquire any property. Rav Sheshes says the person acquires all the property. As the giver knew that a donkey cannot acquire property, he intended for the person who was capable of acquiring property to acquire all the property. Rav Sheshes said, from where do I say this? As it is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yosei says, there is nothing bitter in the cucumber other than its inner part, which is sometimes bitter and inedible and unfit to be separated as terumah, consecrated and given as a gift to the Kohanim, to the priests, who only priests can eat terumah because it's consecrated food fit only for priests to eat. And when the temple is standing in Jerusalem and we're tithing in Israel with the full tithing process, which includes that the first 2% of the produce goes to the Kohanim, goes to the priests, then we're not supposed to give, lesser quality produce to the priests. We give them of our best produce, superior quality produce. You take 2% from your produce, picking from the superior quality produce to give them. So now that you're going to tithe, and there's a problem with cucumbers, that some of them are bitter and some of them are not. The ones that are bitter, the bitter part is in the middle with the particular cucumbers that we're talking about here. So let's see what happens. Rabbi Yosei says, there's nothing bitter in the cucumber other than the inner part, which is sometimes bitter, sometimes not. Therefore, since one does not know if the cucumber that he separates as terumah is bitter inside, when he separates terumah, he adds part of another cucumber as terumah, in addition to the outer part of the cucumber, which is edible. and he separates both as terumah, thereby ensuring that the terumah consists of sufficient edible cucumber. In other words, it's 2%. So if you have 50 cucumbers and you give one to the Kohen, then you have separated terumah properly. You have tithed, in terms of terumah, you have tithed your produce when you had 50 cucumbers and you gave one to the priest. The problem is, what if that cucumber turns out to be bitter and inedible? Now, half of the cucumber, right, the outer part, is going to be edible all the time, but the middle, the core, that's the part that might be bitter and inedible, and so it would turn out that you really only gave the Kohen half of a cucumber. Only half of the cucumber you gave him is edible. So if you add a second cucumber, you're going to make sure that at least there's two outer parts that are edible, and they total one good cucumber, and so then you have satisfied your obligation to give terumah to the Kohen. Okay, how is that related to somebody who says, I'm going to give a gift to you and a donkey? And since this does not invalidate the separation of terumah with regard to the edible outer part, one can infer, let's go back a second. And he separates both as terumah, thereby ensuring that the terumah consists of sufficient edible cucumber. And so Rav Sheshes asks, why does the separation of terumah take effect? Is it not analogous to one who states, you and a donkey shall acquire an item? Since he designated as terumah both the outer part of the cucumber, which is fit to become terumah, and the inedible inner part, which is not fit to become terumah. Since this does not invalidate the separation of terumah with regard to the edible outer part, one can infer that although the donkey cannot acquire property, this does not prevent the person from acquiring that property, either half of it or all of it, but it doesn't mean that it's a meaningless statement. Even though half is meaningless, the other half still is valid and takes effect, right? Since he said that I'm separating this cucumber as terumah, and it's quite possible that half of it is not fit to be terumah and half of it is, well, the half that is fit to be terumah does become terumah, even though half of what he's separating is not fit. So the Gemara says, no. It is different there. As by Torah law, the bitter inner part is also properly considered terumah, even though by rabbinic law, if one separated inferior produce as terumah, he must again separate produce of superior quality to be the terumah. Therefore, when one designates the entire cucumber as terumah, he is not designating both fit and unfit produce. Okay. And this is as Rabbi Ilya says. From where is it derived that the law with regard to one who separates terumah from poor quality produce in order to render superior quality produce tithed and therefore available for eating? The reason that you should not separate, you should not tithe from your poor quality produce in order to render your superior quality produce fit for eating. Remember, until you tithe, you can't eat any of it. Once it's tithed, then it's fit. You can cook with it, you can sell it, you can bring it into your table and eat it. But until it's tithed, you can't. So, if you were, a person of questionable piety, you might think, well, I don't really like my neighbor, the priest, who I'm stuck giving him my terumah, so I'll just give him my cruddy cucumbers and render my beautiful cucumbers edible by me. So, by Torah law, you can do that, right? Because all the Torah law says is you have to separate a certain quantity. The rabbis came and made a fence around the Torah and said it's a little bit more than that. Your obligation is to separate from your superior quality produce for the priest in order to render the rest of your produce tithe. So what the point, it comes out that lechatchila, a priori, you should not separate your inferior quality produce as tithe for your superior quality produce. But after the fact, if you did that, you are tithed. You did create terumah. It's not because you separated from inferior quality produce that it never became terumah. It did become terumah. Right? From where is this derived? That the halacha is with regard to one who separates terumah from poor quality produce for superior quality produce, that is terumah is terumah. It is as is stated with regard to terumah from the Torah, Numbers 18:32, and you shall bear no sin by reason of it, seeing that you have set apart from it the best thereof. So the Torah says you have to separate from the best. By inference, this indicates that it is a transgression to separate the inferior part of the produce as terumah. And if the inferior produce would never become sanctified as produce, as terumah, then why is there a bearing of sin? It would be a meaningless act. There wouldn't be a sin. It's just that you didn't do anything. Right? In other words, what the Torah is saying is if you separate your inferior quality produce as terumah, it's a sin, you have a transgression, but that inferior quality produce did become terumah. Right? If it didn't become terumah because you can't render inferior quality produce into terumah, well then there would be no transgression because it was a meaningless act. Since it is a transgression, that shows you that it is a valid act. You shouldn't have done it, but that inferior quality produce did become terumah. From here, one can derive that the law with regard to one who separates terumah from poor quality produce for superior quality produce is that, although he acted improperly, his terumah is valid terumah. And that would seem to indicate that when I say, I am gifting you my property, I'm gifting my property to you and a donkey, the donkey can't acquire in my property, but the half that I gave to you is nevertheless a valid gift. So you receive half my property. And that's the law. New subject. The Gemara cited Rav Hamnuna's opinion that if one says, you and a donkey shall acquire my property, he did not say anything. We don't follow Rav Hamnuna in this, but that's what he says. Rav Mordecai said to Rav Ashi, Rav Avya raises an objection to Rav Hamnuna's opinion from a Mishna, Tractate Kiddushin, page 50b. An incident occurred involving 5 women, and among them were 2 sisters. And a man gathered a basket of figs that belonged to them, and the fruit was of the sabbatical year. And he said, you are hereby all betrothed to me with this basket. And one of them accepted it on behalf of all of them. So the sages said, the sisters are not betrothed, as it is prohibited to marry the sister of one's wife during her lifetime. So you cannot betroth 2 sisters simultaneously because you can't be married to 2 sisters at the same time. Jacob did that with Rachel and Leah, but that was before the Torah was given. And once the Torah was given, that became prohibited for all time. If you're God forbid your wife dies, then you could marry her sister. But while your wife is alive, even if you've divorced her, you cannot marry her sister. Now, one can infer from the Mishnah, it is only the sisters who are not betrothed, but the unrelated women are betrothed. But why is that so? It is analogous to one who states, you and a donkey shall acquire an item. Since he tried to betroth 2 women who are ineligible for betrothal, along with 3 other women who are eligible for betrothal, the betrothal should not take effect even with regard to the eligible women. Since it does take effect with regard to the eligible women, this proves that one who says, I hereby give my property to you and a donkey, the donkey acquires nothing, that half of the gift stays with me, but the other half goes to you. Rav Ashi said to Rav Mordecai, this is why I saw Rav Huna bar Avia in a dream. Because you are going to tell me that Rav Avia raised an objection to Rav Hamnuna's opinion. But as for this objection, didn't we interpret the Mishna and Kiddushin as referring to where he says, those of you who are eligible for engaging in sexual intercourse with me shall be betrothed to me? Since the sisters were forbidden to him, they were not included in the betrothal in the first place. And there was no impediment to the betrothal of the eligible women taking effect, because this was done at a time before it was prohibited to have multiple wives. Back then it was permitted. So the case is therefore not comparable to the case discussed by Rav Hamnuna. It might be true that I can, say I'll give this gift to you and the donkey, and you acquire half, the donkey acquires nothing. But we don't learn that out from this case of the betrothal, because the circumstances of it were that the 2 sisters were disqualified immediately because of the way he worded it, and the other 3 became, betrothed to him and it doesn't work as a proof for our situation. The Gemara relates, there was a certain man who said to his wife, "My property is given to you and to your sons." So what did he say? Now it's not you and a donkey, right? Now he's giving it to humans. So, okay. He said it's to you and your sons. So he singled out the wife and her sons. So let's say she has 4 sons. So, and let's say that he has $100,000. So he says, "I give my property to you and your sons." Well, how is that $100,000 divided? There's 5 people, the wife and her 4 sons. So is he giving $20,000 to each of the 5 people? Or now that he singled her out, you and my 4 sons, perhaps she gets half and the 4 sons get half, right? So do each one get 20%, or does she get half and the 4 sons get half? Let's see. There was a certain man who said to his wife, "My property is given to you and your sons." Rav Yosef says, in such a case, the wife acquires half of the property, even though the man did not specify how much of his property he was giving to her. And Rav Yosef said, "From where do I say this?" As it is taught in the Baraisa, Rebbe says, the verse states with regard to the showbread, "And it shall be for Aaron and his sons." Right? So the first Kohen Gadol, the first high priest, was Aaron, Moses' brother. And then his sons after him were, his descendants are the Kohanim. They are the priests. And everyone who is a Kohen, everyone who is a priest, he knows that because his father was a priest who told him, "You're a priest, I'm a priest, you're a priest." They are all descendants of Aaron, the sons of Aaron. And God said that the priests who serve in the temple, they get certain gifts because of the work that they do, the avoda, the service that they perform in the Holy Temple when the temple is standing in Jerusalem. And one of those gifts is the showbreads, right? These 12 loaves that when the temple is standing, they remain miraculously warm and fresh all week, even though they're sitting on a table in the sanctuary. And then after they've been out there for 1 week, the new 12 loaves are brought in. The old 12 loaves are distributed to the Kohanim in the temple. So the way that that's worded in the Torah is that it says in Leviticus 24:9, "And it shall be for Aaron and his sons." This means half of the breads are for Aaron and the other half are for his sons, right? So or presumably for the Kohen Gadol, he gets half and the other priests get half, or at least when Aaron was alive, he got half and his sons who were serving alongside him got the other half. One can infer from the Baraisa that when it is specified that a gift is to be divided between an individual and a group, the intention is that the individual gets half and the group gets half. Abaye said to Rav Yosef, "Granted, there in the case of the showbread in the Holy Temple, Aaron is eligible to receive a share of the showbread as a priest. It is for this reason that the Merciful One specified him separately, so that he should take more than the other priests." In other words, he is a priest as well as being the high priest, so he would have got a share anyway. Now that the Torah has isolated him, Aaron and his sons, we understand he gets half, the other sons get half. But he was already part of that group, right? If we say a mother and her sons, she's not one of the sons, right? She is the mother, separate entity, and the sons. So maybe in that situation, she just gets the same as the sons, 1/5 for each one of them. Whereas if it had said, my property is hereby given to my middle son and my sons. So there, since he would have been received it anyway as one of the sons, now that he's been named, as a separate entity, maybe only there he gets half and the other sons get half. But when the mother is not one of the sons, maybe she only gets a portion equal to the other sons. Right? Aaron is eligible to receive a share of the showbread as a priest, and it is for this reason that the merciful one specified him separately, so that he should take more than the other priests, i.e. half. But with regard to a woman who is not eligible to inherit her husband's property alongside his sons, it is sufficient for her to receive a portion of the inheritance equal to what the portion of each son, not half of all the property. You might think. The Gemara raises an objection. Is that so? But there was an incident in Nehardea where a man gave a gift to an individual and to a group of people. And Shmuel allocated half of the sum to the individual. And there was a similar case in Tiberia. And Rabbi Yochanan collected half the sum for the individual. And furthermore, when Rav Yitzhak Bar Yosef came from Eretz Yisrael, he said there was a certain coronation tax that was placed by the royal house on the city councilmen and on the prominent citizens. And Rebbe said, let the city councilmen give half and the prominent citizens give half. So this indicates that when two groups are mentioned together, the intent is that each group represents half of the amount. Or when an individual is mentioned alongside a group, the individual gets half and the group gets half. But the Gemara rejects this argument. How can the case concerning the tax that was split between the city councilmen and the prominent citizens, how can that case be compared to the other cases? There, initially, when they would write the writ of assessment, when the king demanding tax from that town would write the writ of assessment, they would write that it was placed on the city councilmen alone. And the prominent citizens would assist the city councilmen in raising the sum. And the king knew that the prominent citizens were assisting the city councilmen. Therefore, now, the meaning of what they wrote, it is placed on the city councilmen and on the prominent citizens, is to say that this group should give half the tax and the other group should give half the tax. But here you're talking about two groups. How are we going to learn out from what the resolution of a question involving two groups that we're applying that to an individual and a group? But that just was the fourth example, right? The first few examples said, okay, an individual and a group. And several of the sages ruled that when an individual and a group are mentioned, the intent of the giver is that the individual gets half and the group gets half. Rabbi Zera raises an objection to Rav Yosef's ruling from a Baraisa in the Tosefta of Menachos 12:7. With regard to one who says, it is incumbent upon me to bring a meal offering of 100 tenths of an ephah in 2 vessels, right? So a tenth of an ephah was a standard measure of meal that was brought as a meal offering in the Holy Temple. And so this guy says, I'm going to bring 100 of those. Okay. And he says, it is incumbent upon me to bring a meal offering of 100 tenths of an ephah in 2 vessels. So he says, I'm obligating myself, right? I'm just reading here, Bli Neder. I salifak and not obligating myself to do anything. But this man said he's obligating himself to bring 100 meal offerings in 2 vessels, right? So he's saying it that way. So what does he do? So there's 100 of these offerings. He brings 60 of them in 1 vessel and the remaining 40 in the other vessel. Why? Because no more than 60 of these offerings may be brought in a single vessel. Now we're on page 143b. And if he brought 50 in 1 vessel and 50 in another vessel, he fulfilled his obligation. So one can infer from the Baraisa that after the fact, if he brought 50 in each vessel, yes, he fulfilled his obligation. But ab initio, he should not do so. He should have done it 60-40. And if it should enter your mind to say that every case like this is divided half and half, well, then it should be permitted to divide the meal offering into equal halves, even ab initio. Now, the Gemara dismisses Rabbi Zera's objection. How can these cases be compared? There, in the case of the meal offering, it is clear to us that this person initially intended to bring a large offering, 100 of these offerings. And the reason he said that he will bring the offering in 2 vessels was that he knew that it was not possible to bring the entire offering in a single vessel. Therefore, we bring in a single vessel as much as it is possible to bring, and that's 60. In any other case, it is possible that the division should be into 2 equal portions. Right? This is just a particularity of the service vessels in the Holy Temple, that the maximum number of meal offerings that you could hold in one service vessel was 60. So if you were bringing more than that, you would bring the biggest offering possible in the first vessel. That would be 60. And then whatever else you pledged to bring, in this case 40 more, would come in the second vessel. And that's why you don't split it 50-50. The first one needs to be full. That one is 60, leaving 40. But that 60-40 split only applies under these special circumstances of the service vessels in the temple, where he said, I'm going to bring this huge offering in 2 vessels. Whereas normally, if somebody said, I'm going to give you people, $100, I'm going to give, Sam and the boys $100. There's no proof from that we should or shouldn't make it 50-50. We don't really learn out from the case of the service vessel. Now, the Gemara concludes, and the halacha is, and the law is, in accordance with the opinion of Rav Yosef, in 3 matters where he disagreed with Rabbah. Meaning that usually Rabbah versus Rav Yosef, we follow Rabbah. But in these 3 cases, we follow Rav Yosef. Namely, in the matter of dividing a field between brothers, which we actually learned on page 12 of this tractate 130 days ago. And we follow Rav Yosef in the matter of whether certain actions are limited by the court session or by the topic of discussion in the court, which we mentioned on page 114. And, this is why it's relevant now, and in the matter of half, i.e. this matter, whether an unspecified division into 2 parts is divided into 2 equal halves, meaning we do that. Now, the Gemara cites additional incidents concerning a gift whose method of division was not specified, where he says, I'm giving it to Sam and the boys. Does he mean 50-50 or not? It seems like, according to Rav Yosef, we do. Okay, let's see some other incidents related to this. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. There was a certain man who said to those surrounding him, I leave my property to my sons. And he had only 1 son and 1 daughter. So the question was raised, do people call a single son my sons? And in his will, his point was to remove his daughter even from the tenth of his property that would rightfully be her dowry. Right? Daughters don't inherit alongside their brothers, but the brothers have an obligation to sustain the daughters, and the daughters do get a tenth of the estate as their dowry so that they can get married. At least the way it was practiced in the ancient world. So when he says, when he knows he has a son and a daughter, and he says, my property goes to my sons, does he mean to say that, there's something inappropriate about his daughter? He doesn't like his daughter. He's mad at his daughter and he's disinheriting her. And that's why he says, I'm giving all my property to my son. That's what he meant. But he used the plural sons. So what does he mean? He only has 1 son. So does the word my sons just mean my male offspring, which in this case there's only 1, and his goal was to disinherit his daughter? Or does it mean something else? Or perhaps people do not call a single son my sons, and he came to include his daughter in the gift. Maybe just was saying, I want to give it to my children. And he referred to his children as his sons. Abaye said, come and hear a proof that one does refer to a single son using the plural term sons. As it is written, quote, and the sons of Dan, Hushim, in Genesis 46:23. Rava said to Abaye, perhaps this verse should be understood as the school of Chizkiah taught, that Hushim is not the name of Dan's son, but that they, Dan's sons, were as numerous as the groups, Hushim, of reeds. Rather, Rava said one can prove this usage of the term sons in the verse and the sons of Palu, Eliab, in Numbers 26:8. And Rav Yosef said this can be proven from another verse, and the sons of Ethan, Azariah. Okay, you're citing scripture, which was centuries, many centuries before, maybe the use of language wasn't the same then as later, So probably they were saying it's possible that he meant to disinherit the daughter and referred to his son as my sons, but they didn't say that's the outcome of this litigation. Rather, that was a factor to be considered, and they probably brought in further testimony, evidence, etc. Another story. There was a certain man who said to those surrounding him, I leave my property to my sons. And he had a son and a grandson, i.e. his son's son. So the question was raised, do people call a grandson a son, or do they not? He only had one son, but he also had a grandson, that son's son. So when he says, I leave my property to my sons, was he saying split it between my son and my grandson? Or did he really just mean the same thing? He meant my son, and he used the word my sons plural. Rav Chaviva said, people call a grandson a son. Mar bar Rav Ashi said, people do not call a grandson a son. And the Gemara comments, it is taught in Baraisa in accordance with the opinion of Mar bar Rav Ashi, with regard to one prohibited by a vow from deriving benefit from a certain person's sons, it is permitted for him to derive benefit from the sons of that person's sons, as they are not included in the term sons. Descendants would be different. Offspring would be different. But when you say my sons, it seems to mean his sons and not his grandsons. And my sons might include, one son, and to the exclusion of the daughter, but we have not proven that. It's just a possibility. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 9 of Tractate Bava Basra. Okay, let's take some questions. May one choose among contradictory rulings, especially if it's one way in Yisrael and another way in Bava? Amazing question, right? This is why, first of all, they maybe had regional choices back then, that they would follow their Rav. You always ask your Rav, right? That's the answer. When you're not sure what the law is, you have to ask your Rav, and your Rav will tell you, what he rules and what your community follows. Because certainly there are at least customs, that Chabad Hasidim follow, that Satmar Hasidim don't follow, and vice versa. There's bigger differences between what Ashkenaz, Yeshivish Jews follow and what Hasidish, Nusach Sfard Jews follow. Even bigger difference between Sephardic Jews and Ashkenazic Jews. There's lots of differences in the Jewish world, but those are usually matters of custom, not of halacha. And generally speaking, these laws have been worked out, but there's always new questions. And that's why you ask your local Orthodox rabbi what the answer is when you are not sure. So while there may be differences in customs, and traditions, there's usually not any differences of halacha anywhere within the Jewish world, because the halacha has really been set by Shulchan Aruch and by Rambam. These guys were operating 1800 to 1500 years ago. By 1,000 years ago, most of the halachas were pretty well set. By 500 years ago, they were very well set. Nevertheless, in terms of customs, you can get different answers from different rabbis, and sometimes even rabbis, are following different traditions. And if you, have a kind of one of those subtle questions about tradition, and there's a kind of an answer that you want, because it's going to let you eat what you want, when you want, and you ask your rabbi, and he gives you the answer you don't like, and then you go ask another rabbi, that's actually not permitted. You can't go rabbi shopping. You can't go answer shopping among rabbis. That's why you need to have a Rav in your life to ask. Tom, with respect to separating low-quality terumah, could the bitter inner part still be used for another purpose? If so, it's still consecrated and can't be used for a non-temple purpose. That's absolutely right. Maybe it could be used as animal food, right? That the Kohen could use to feed his animals. But as we discovered later, you probably asked this question a little bit earlier, the terumah that you separate even from low-quality produce is terumah, right? They derived that. You shouldn't have done it, but it is terumah. And Tom also says, I presume the unrelated women are betrothed only if they accept. Well, what was interesting there was that it said one woman accepted on behalf of the others. What? Right? I think a woman has to accept for herself. Now, I think what it meant was that the other women, deputized one of their group, those 3 women who were eligible. They told one of them, accept on our behalf, right? So all 3 were voluntary participants. It's not that one of them accepted on behalf of all of them without checking with the others. Though that wasn't really the issue that we're discussing here. Here the issue was, among the 5 women, 2 were ineligible. The one who says, I accept on all of our behalf, thought that all 5 were included, and maybe the offer was made to all 5. And then the question was, if only 3 are eligible, are they betrothed now that 2 are ineligible? But then we learn later that the circumstances were different. He already disqualified the ones that weren't fit to be betrothed to him. And so the other 3 were fit and they were betrothed. Sharon, wouldn't only one sister be ineligible among the women? Right. The problem was that he was trying to betroth 2 sisters at the same time. That's definitely prohibited. If he betrothed one sister and they were betrothed, and then he went to betroth the second sister, the second one, that would be a meaningless statement because he's already betrothed to the first. But I guess where he tries to betroth 2 sisters simultaneously, neither becomes betrothed because he tried to do something prohibited and both were included at the same time. Karen, the guy tried to betroth 5 women with a basket of fruit in a sabbatical year. Is there no discussion about it being forbidden to benefit from that fruit? I think the idea was that that fruit doesn't belong to whoever owns the vineyard because it's the sabbatical year, but people can take the fruit and eat it, right? As long as it's just growing, and it's not, the owner of the field can harvest it, but as long as, but I think, it's just deemed ownerless and people can eat it. It's not like you're starving in that year. There's definitely nuances to that. I don't remember exactly the rules when you can take and when you can't. That in Tractate Kiddushin certainly was addressed, but for our purposes here, that was not the part of that story that we were looking at. Sharon, in Hebrew, children and sons are the same word, right? Banim. Couldn't the man, when saying my sons, actually mean my children? I was thinking the same thing as I was reading that. I think what they were saying is in the context, it was clear, and maybe it was in Aramaic that it was a little bit, maybe it's banim versus bainim. I'm not sure. But it seems like they were clear in that situation. Otherwise it would be a meaningless question. Why are they asking? Obviously they know Hebrew. So it must be that in that context, it was clear that he was saying sons and not children. That's what I've got for us tonight with God's help. We'll be together again tomorrow, Friday at the regular Friday time, noon Pacific. God willing, we'll also have class Saturday night, Motzi Shabbos. Now that Shabbos ends much earlier, trying to get on the air by 7, maybe even a little earlier. But no class Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday, as I'll be in New York for the New York City premiere of Guns N' Moses at the charity event for Join Israel. There's a link in the comments for tickets to go to that. Have a great night.